The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty training ground as 18-year-old Marcus Chen adjusted his rifle scope for the 100th time that week. His hands, steady beyond his years, moved with the precision of someone who had been handling firearms since he could barely lift them. The other recruits around him were still fumbling with their equipment, but Marcus had already zeroed in on his target 300 meters away. "Shun!" Sergeant Rodriguez's voice boomed across the range. "Front end, center." Marcus set down his rifle and jogged over to where the grizzled instructor stood, his weathered face showing a mixture of approval and concern that had become familiar over the past 6 months of intensive training. "Sir!" Marcus snapped to attention, his slight frame belying the steel that had been forged within him during these grueling months. Rodriguez studied the young man before him. At 18, Marcus looked even younger, with his boyish features and earnest brown eyes. But those eyes held something that set him apart from every other recruit who had passed through this specialized program. They held the calm certainty of someone who understood that sometimes, one perfect shot could mean the difference between life and death. "Your scores are off the charts again, son," Rodriguez said, glancing down at his clipboard. 98% accuracy at 500 meters, 96% at 700. Hell, you even managed 92% at 1,000 meters yesterday. Marcus remained at attention, but internally he felt the familiar surge of quiet pride. He had been working toward this moment for as long as he could remember. Growing up in rural Montana, he had learned to shoot before he could properly tie his shoes. His grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had taught him that shooting wasn't about aggression or violence, it was about discipline, patience, and the awesome responsibility that came with holding life and death in your hands. "But, here's the thing, Chen," Rodriguez continued, his tone becoming more serious. "Technical skill is only part of what makes a sniper. The real test comes when you're out there in the field, when lives are hanging in the balance, and when you have to make decisions that will haunt you for the rest of your life." The sergeant began walking, and Marcus fell into step beside him. Around them, the sounds of training continued, the crack of rifles, the shouted commands of instructors, the heavy breathing of recruits pushing their bodies to their limits. "Tell me about your family, Shun," Rodriguez said unexpectedly. Marcus was caught off guard by the personal question, but he had learned not to hesitate when his superiors spoke to him. "My parents run a small ranch in Montana, sir. My grandfather served in Korea. He taught me to shoot when I was 7 years old. Why are you here, son?" "Really? Not the patriotic speech you gave during your interview. The real reason." Marcus was quiet for a long moment as they walked. The question had been asked before, but somehow it felt different coming from Rodriguez, a man who had seen combat in 3 different theaters and whose reputation for producing elite snipers was legendary throughout the military. "When I was 14, sir, my younger sister Emma got lost in the mountains during a camping trip," Marcus began, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of old pain. "Search and rescue teams looked for 3 days. The terrain was too rough for helicopters most of the time, and the ground teams couldn't cover enough area fast enough." Rodriguez nodded, sensing there was more to the story. "On the 3rd night, I snuck out with my grandfather's rifle and went looking for her myself. I knew those mountains better than anyone, and I figured I could cover ground the search teams couldn't reach." Marcus paused, remembering that desperate night. "I found her just after dawn on the 4th day. She had fallen into a ravine and broken her leg. She was hypothermic, dehydrated, barely conscious." "How did you get her out?" "I couldn't carry her up the ravine wall, and she couldn't climb. The rescue teams were miles away, and by the time they reached us, it might have been too late." Marcus's voice grew quieter. "There was a dead tree wedged across the ravine about 40 feet up. If I could shoot through the trunk at exactly the right spot, I could bring it down to make a bridge she could crawl across." Rodriguez stopped walking and turned to face Marcus fully. "That's a hell of a shot for a 14-year-old kid." "I had 1 bullet, sir. The tree was maybe 8 inches thick, and I had to hit it at just the right angle to make it fall in the right direction without crushing her. The range was about 200 meters, shooting downward at a steep angle." Marcus met Rodriguez's gaze steadily. "I made the shot. The tree fell exactly where I needed it to. Emma crawled across, and I carried her out of there.
And that's when you decided you wanted to be a sniper?
No, sir. That's when I realized that sometimes, one perfect shot can save a life. That's when I understood what my grandfather had been trying to teach me all those years about responsibility and precision. Marcus's voice carried a conviction that impressed even the veteran sergeant. I want to be the person who can make that shot when it matters most.
Rodriguez resumed walking, processing what he had just heard.
In his 25 years of training snipers, he had heard every possible motivation. Some recruits were motivated by glory, others by a desire for revenge, still others by simple patriotic duty. But Marcus Chen was driven by something rarer and more powerful, the knowledge that his skills could be the thin line between life and death for people who couldn't protect themselves. The program you're in, Chen, it's not like regular sniper training, Rodriguez said as they approached a building Marcus had never been inside before.
We're preparing you for situations that most people can't even imagine.
Hostage rescues, counter-terrorism operations, missions where civilian lives hang in the balance and there's no room for error.
Marcus nodded.
He had suspected as much from the intensity of the training and the secrecy surrounding certain aspects of the program. Next week, you're going to begin the final phase of your training, Rodriguez continued, stopping in front of the building's entrance. You'll be working with our psychological preparation team, learning to handle the mental pressure of life or death decisions. You'll train with hostage negotiators, study terrorist tactics, and learn to operate in urban environments where a missed shot doesn't just mean mission failure, it means innocent people die. The weight of Rodriguez's words settled on Marcus's shoulders like a familiar burden. He had always understood that his abilities came with responsibility, but the scope of what lay ahead was beginning to become clear. Are you ready for that level of responsibility, son? Marcus thought about Emma, about that desperate morning in the ravine when everything had depended on his ability to make one perfect shot under impossible circumstances. He thought about his grandfather's weathered hands guiding his aim, teaching him that every bullet fired carried with it the shooter's character and intentions.
Yes, sir. I'm ready.
Rodriguez opened the door to the building, revealing a sophisticated indoor training facility unlike anything Marcus had seen before. Multiple levels, moving targets, and what appeared to be mock urban environments stretched out before them. Good, Rodriguez said. Because in 2 weeks, you're going to face your first real test. There's a situation developing overseas, a hostage crisis that our intelligence suggests might require exactly the kind of precise, long-range intervention you're training for. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his breathing remained steady. This was what he had been preparing for, what every hour of training had been building toward.
The mission brief will come later, Rodriguez continued. For now, I want you to understand something.
The shot you made to save your sister was impressive for a 14-year-old with a hunting rifle. The shot you might be asked to make in 2 weeks will be at 5 times the distance, with wind factors you can't predict, against a target that might move at the last second, with the lives of multiple hostages depending on your accuracy. They walked deeper into the training facility, passing mock building facades and urban warfare scenarios that looked terrifyingly realistic.
The physical training is almost complete, Chen.
Your marksmanship scores are among the best we've ever recorded. But the real test of a sniper isn't how well you can hit a stationary target on a calm day at a known distance.
Rodriguez's voice grew more intense.
The real test is whether you can make the impossible shot when everything is going wrong, when the stakes couldn't be higher, and when failure isn't an option. Marcus absorbed this, his mind already beginning to process the implications. He had spent his entire life preparing for moments like this, even before he knew what form they would take.
Sir, may I ask about the nature of the situation we might be dealing with?
Rodriguez glanced around to ensure they were alone before answering. Intelligence suggests a group of international terrorists has taken control of a civilian facility overseas.
Multiple hostages, including American citizens.
The location and layout make a traditional assault extremely risky for the hostages.
And a precision shot might provide the opening needed for a rescue? Potentially.
But the variables involved make it one of the most challenging scenarios our analysts have ever modeled. Rodriguez stopped walking and turned to face Marcus directly. The target would be at extreme range, in an urban environment, with multiple potential complications. Weather, wind, civilian movement, the possibility of the target relocating at the last second. Marcus felt the familiar calm settling over him that always came when he was faced with a challenging shot. His grandfather had taught him that fear and doubt were the sniper's greatest enemies, that true marksmanship began with absolute mental clarity.
What kind of range are we talking about, sir?
Preliminary reconnaissance suggests anywhere from 800 to 1200 meters, depending on available positions.
Rodriguez's expression was grave. And the window of opportunity might be measured in seconds, not minutes.
The numbers didn't intimidate Marcus as much as they might have intimidated other shooters. He had been consistently hitting targets at those ranges during training, and his natural ability seemed to compensate for factors that challenged more experienced shooters. "Sir, I'd like to request additional training time with long-range scenarios that include urban complications and time pressure variables." Rodriguez smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun.
"I was hoping you'd say that, Chen. Because that's exactly what we're going to be doing for the next 2 weeks.
Every scenario, every variable, every possible complication we can think of." They continued their tour of the facility, with Rodriguez pointing out various training areas that would become Marcus's world for the foreseeable future. Mock apartment buildings with windows at precise distances, wind machines that could simulate various weather conditions, and even areas designed to replicate the psychological pressure of knowing that real lives hung in the balance. "One more thing, Chen," Rodriguez said as they completed their circuit. "The team you'll potentially be working with includes some of the most experienced operators in the world. They'll be counting on you to deliver when it matters most. That kind of trust isn't given lightly, and it's not something you can afford to take lightly."
Marcus understood.
The solitary nature of his training had sometimes made it easy to forget that snipers, despite working alone, were always part of a larger team. His shot would be just one element in a complex operation involving dozens of highly trained professionals, all of whom would be depending on his ability to perform under pressure.
"I won't let them down, sir." "I know you won't, son.
Your technical skills are exceptional, and your psychological profile suggests you have the mental fortitude for this kind of work. But remember, the moment you take that shot, if it comes to that, you cross a line that can never be uncrossed.
The person you are after that moment will be different from the person you are now."
The weight of Rodriguez's words settled heavily on Marcus. He had always understood intellectually that his training was preparation for taking human life when necessary, but the reality of what that meant was beginning to crystallize in a new way. "My grandfather told me something once," Marcus said quietly. "He said that the true measure of a warrior isn't his willingness to take life, but his understanding of the value of the life he's trying to protect."
Rodriguez nodded approvingly.
"Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He said that every shot a soldier fires should be fired with the hope that it will be the last shot that needs to be fired."
"And do you believe that, Chen?"
Marcus considered the question carefully. "I believe that when someone chooses to threaten innocent lives, they make a decision that has consequences. If I can stop that threat with one precise shot, then maybe I can prevent a lot more violence and save lives that would otherwise be lost."
"That's the right mindset, son. Hold on to that.
Because in 2 weeks, you might be called upon to put that philosophy into practice." As they left the training facility, Marcus felt the full weight of his approaching responsibility settling on his shoulders. The boy who had started this journey 6 months ago had been motivated by a desire to help people and a natural talent with firearms. The young man walking beside Sergeant Rodriguez now understood that he was being prepared to make decisions and take actions that would define not just his own future, but potentially the futures of people he had never met. The sun was setting over the training compound as they walked back toward the barracks. Around them, other recruits were finishing their daily training routines, but Marcus knew that his real preparation was just beginning. In the days ahead, he would push his skills to their absolute limits, preparing for a moment that might never come but that he had to be ready for nonetheless. That night, as he cleaned his rifle with the methodical precision that had become second nature, Marcus thought about Emma and that desperate morning in the ravine. He thought about his grandfather's steady hands and patient voice. And he thought about the unknown people, somewhere across the world, whose lives might soon depend on his ability to make one perfect shot when everything else had failed. The rifle in his hands was no longer just a tool or a symbol of his skills. It had become an extension of his will, a means of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And, in 2 weeks, he might discover whether all his training, all his preparation, and all his dedication would be enough when it mattered most. The helicopter's rotors beat steadily against the pre-dawn darkness as Marcus Chen checked his equipment for the 5th time in as many minutes. The weight of his rifle case felt heavier than usual, not because of its physical mass, but because of what it represented. 3 weeks of intensive final training had led to this moment, his first real mission. Across from him in the helicopter's cabin sat Captain Sarah Mitchell, the team leader whose reputation for successful hostage extractions was legendary throughout the special operations community. Her weathered features and calm demeanor radiated the kind of confidence that could only come from years of experience in situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Final briefing, people. Mitchell's voice cut through the helicopter's noise as she activated a tablet displaying satellite imagery of their destination. We're dealing with a pharmaceutical research facility in the mountains of Eastern Europe. 12 hostages, including 3 American researchers and a group of international journalists who were touring the facility when it was taken. Marcus studied the aerial photographs, his trained eye automatically identifying potential shooting positions and calculating ranges. The facility was built into the side of a mountain, with a main building connected to several smaller structures by covered walkways. The terrain around it was rugged and heavily forested, providing both challenges and opportunities for their mission. The terrorists are a splinter group with ties to international arms dealers, Mitchell continued. Intelligence suggests they're holding the hostages in the main laboratory building, specifically in a conference room on the 3rd floor with large windows facing east toward the valley. She zoomed in on the building, highlighting the windows in question. The problem is that the room has floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, which means the hostages are visible from multiple angles, but so are the terrorists. Any attempt at a frontal assault would likely result in civilian casualties. Marcus felt his pulse steady as his mind shifted into the focused state that had become familiar during training. The tactical challenge was complex, but not insurmountable. The key would be identifying the right moment and the right position to take a shot that would create an opening for the assault team without endangering the hostages. Chen, you'll be positioned on a ridgeline approximately 900 meters from the target building, Mitchell said, highlighting a position on the map. The angle isn't ideal, you'll be shooting slightly upward at about a 15-degree elevation. Wind conditions are variable due to the mountain terrain, and weather reports suggest possible cloud cover that could affect visibility. What about backup positions, ma'am? Marcus asked, studying the topography. There are 2 alternatives, Mitchell replied, pointing to other locations on the map. Position Alpha 2 is about 700 meters out, but the angle would put you almost directly in line with the hostages. Position Alpha 3 is at 1200 meters with a better angle, but the range pushes the envelope even for your capabilities. Marcus nodded, mentally running through the ballistic calculations for each scenario. The 900-meter shot would be challenging but manageable under ideal conditions. The variables introduced by terrain, weather, and the pressure of the situation would make it significantly more difficult. Timeline? Marcus asked. The terrorists have issued an ultimatum. Mitchell's expression grew more grim. They're demanding the release of several imprisoned associates and safe passage out of the country. If their demands aren't met by 1800 hours today, they've threatened to begin executing hostages. Marcus glanced at his watch. They had less than 12 hours. The plan is to get you into position by 0800, Mitchell continued. That gives you 10 hours to study the target, account for environmental variables, and wait for the optimal shot opportunity. The assault team will be positioned and ready to move the moment you take your shot. The helicopter began its descent toward a temporary forward operating base that had been established in a valley about 5 miles from the target location. As they approached, Marcus could see the activity below: vehicles, communication equipment, and personnel from various agencies working together with the kind of coordinated intensity that characterized high-stakes operations. Chen, Mitchell said as the helicopter settled onto the landing zone. I need to know, are you ready for this?
Because once we commit to this plan, there's no going back. That shot you make, if you make it, will be the signal for a complex operation involving dozens of people. If you miss, or if the timing is wrong, people will die.
Marcus met her gaze steadily.
I'm ready, ma'am. I understand the stakes.
Good. Because the man you'll potentially be shooting has been identified as Viktor Kozlov, a former military sniper with the Russian Special Forces. Intelligence suggests he's been involved in at least 6 previous hostage situations, and he has a reputation for carrying out his threats.
The information about Kozlov's background didn't surprise Marcus.
He had expected that their opposition would be highly trained and experienced. In a way, it simplified things. He was preparing to engage a legitimate military target who had chosen to threaten innocent lives. As they disembarked from the helicopter, Marcus was met by a member of the intelligence team who handed him a comprehensive dossier on the target building, the terrorists, and the hostages. The level of detail was impressive: floor plans, structural analysis, psychological profiles, and even information about the building's ventilation system and electrical layout. Your equipment has already been transported to the staging area, the intelligence officer informed him. We've also set up a mock range that replicates the distance and angle you'll be dealing with, so you can test your rifle's zero and get a feel for the specific conditions. Marcus appreciated the attention to detail. In training, he had learned that the difference between success and failure often came down to preparation and the ability to account for variables that less experienced shooters might overlook. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Marcus tested his equipment, studied the target area through high-powered optics, and worked with meteorologists to understand the wind patterns and weather conditions he would be facing. Every piece of information was crucial. The temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and wind speed would all affect the trajectory of his bullet over the 900-meter distance. At dawn, Marcus began the careful journey to his shooting position. The terrain was exactly as challenging as the satellite imagery had suggested: steep, rocky, and covered with dense vegetation that provided excellent concealment but made movement difficult. He was accompanied by a spotter, Sergeant First Class David Park, whose job would be to help him read environmental conditions and provide security while Marcus focused on the shot.
Range to target? Park asked as they settled into their position on the ridgeline.
Marcus adjusted his rifle scope and took a reading with his rangefinder.
897 meters.
Wind is currently 3 to 5 miles per hour, variable direction. Through his scope, Marcus could see the target building clearly. The large windows of the conference room were visible, but, at this distance, individual figures inside were difficult to distinguish. He would need to wait for the right moment when his target was clearly separated from the hostages. Movement in the target room, Park reported, studying the building through his own optics. I can see multiple figures, but it's difficult to distinguish between hostages and terrorists from this range.
Marcus knew that patience would be crucial.
Hasty shots led to mistakes, and mistakes in this situation would be catastrophic. He had all day if necessary to wait for the perfect moment.
Hours passed slowly.
Marcus remained motionless behind his rifle, occasionally adjusting for changes in wind or light conditions, but never losing focus on the target area. Through his radio, he could hear periodic updates from the command team and the assault groups that were positioned around the building. "Sniper team, this is command," came a voice through his earpiece. "We have confirmation that negotiations have broken down.
The terrorists are preparing to make good on their threats. Your shot may be our only option."
Marcus felt the familiar calm settle over him. This was the moment all his training had prepared him for.
"Command, sniper. I'm in position and ready.
Waiting for target identification and clear shot opportunity."
"Roger, sniper."
Intelligence indicates that Kozlov can be identified by a red jacket. He's been positioned near the windows, apparently to show the negotiators that he's serious about his threats. Through his scope, Marcus could indeed see a figure in a red jacket moving near the windows. The distance was significant, but not beyond his capabilities. The challenge would be ensuring that his shot was timed perfectly to coincide with the assault team's movement. "I have eyes on target," Marcus reported.
Male in red jacket, positioned approximately 2 meters from the east-facing windows.
Multiple other figures in the room, presumed to be hostages. Sniper, command. Weather update shows wind increasing to 8 to 12 miles per hour, variable direction. Be advised, cloud cover is moving in from the west. Marcus adjusted his scope for the changing conditions. Wind at this range could easily push his bullet several inches off target, and the approaching clouds would affect light conditions. He would need to time his shot carefully to account for these variables.
Park, what's your read on wind direction? Marcus asked his spotter.
Park studied the vegetation around them and consulted his instruments. Currently northeast at about 9 miles per hour, but it's gusting unpredictably.
I'd estimate plus or minus 3 miles per hour variability.
Marcus made the necessary adjustments to his scope, calculating the bullet's trajectory over the distance involved.
At 900 meters, even small environmental factors would have significant effects on accuracy.
Movement in the target room, Park reported suddenly.
The subject in the red jacket is approaching the windows.
Marcus could see it too through his scope.
Kozlov was moving toward the large windows, apparently preparing to make some kind of demonstration or threat. This could be the opportunity they had been waiting for. Command, Sniper.
Target is approaching optimal position. Request permission to engage when shot is clear. Sniper, command.
You are cleared hot. Repeat, you are cleared to engage when you have a clear shot.
Marcus's breathing slowed and deepened as he entered the mental state that had become second nature during months of training. His heartbeat steadied, his grip on the rifle relaxed, and his focus narrowed to include only the target and the environmental factors that would affect his shot.
Through his scope, he could see Kozlov clearly now.
The terrorist was standing near the windows, holding what appeared to be a weapon, with several figures that were obviously hostages visible in the background. The shot would be challenging. Marcus would need to ensure that his bullet's trajectory wouldn't endanger any of the civilians. Wind check, Marcus requested. Current wind northeast at 11 miles per hour, steady, Park replied. Temperature is 42 degrees, humidity 60%. Marcus made final adjustments to his scope and settled into his shooting position. The crosshairs of his scope were centered on Kozlov's torso, a target area large enough to ensure a hit even if environmental factors caused slight deflection. Target is stationary, Marcus reported quietly.
I have a clear shot. All teams, this is command. Sniper is preparing to engage.
Assault teams, be ready to move on my signal.
Marcus's finger found the trigger of his rifle.
Years of training, months of preparation, and hours of patient waiting had led to this single moment. Through his scope, he could see Kozlov clearly, apparently unaware that he was being targeted from nearly a kilometer away. Send it, came the quiet command from the radio. Marcus's breathing stopped momentarily as he applied steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, and the sound of the shot echoed across the valley. Through his scope, Marcus watched as his bullet crossed the distance in what seemed like slow motion but was actually less than 2 seconds. The shot was true. Kozlov dropped immediately, and Marcus could see the other figures in the room, both hostages and remaining terrorists, react with shock and confusion. Almost immediately, the sounds of the assault team's breach could be heard even at Marcus's distant position.
Target down, Marcus reported. Shot successful.
Assault teams are moving. The next few minutes were tense as radio chatter filled Marcus's earpiece with updates from the assault teams as they cleared the building room by room. The precision of Marcus's shot had created the exact opening that had been planned. With their leader down, the remaining terrorists were caught off guard and unable to mount an effective resistance. All teams, this is assault leader.
Building is secure. All hostages are safe. Repeat, all hostages are accounted for and unharmed.
Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. The shot that had taken months to prepare for and hours of patient waiting to execute had lasted less than a second, but it had achieved its intended purpose. The hostages were safe, the terrorists had been neutralized, and the complex operation had succeeded. Outstanding work, Sniper, came Captain Mitchell's voice through the radio.
That shot created exactly the opening we needed. Mission accomplished. As Marcus began the process of packing up his equipment and preparing to leave his position, he reflected on what had just occurred. The months of training, the psychological preparation, and the technical challenges had all culminated in this moment. He had proven to himself and to his team that he could perform under the ultimate pressure. But, even as he felt satisfaction at the mission's success, Marcus understood that this was just the beginning. The skills he had demonstrated today, the ability to make precision shots under extreme pressure, would likely be called upon again. The world was full of situations where traditional military approaches weren't feasible, where the precision of a single well-placed shot could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. As they made their way back to the forward operating base, Park clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "Hell of a shot, Chen. 900 meters, variable wind, upward angle, and you put it exactly where it needed to be." Marcus nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond the immediate success of the mission. He was thinking about the hostages who would go home to their families, about the journalists who would live to tell important stories, and about the researchers whose work might someday save lives. His shot had been just one element in a complex operation, but it had been the critical element that made everything else possible. The helicopter ride back to base gave Marcus time to process what had occurred. He had crossed the threshold that Sergeant Rodriguez had warned him about. He was no longer a trainee preparing for the possibility of taking human life in the line of duty. He was now an operational sniper who had proven his ability to perform when lives hung in the balance. But, rather than feeling changed in the way he had expected, Marcus found that his fundamental understanding of his role remained the same. He was a protector, someone who used precision and skill to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. The shot he had made today had been fired with the same intention as the shot he had made years ago to save his sister Emma, to create a path to safety for people who were in danger. As the base came into view, Marcus knew that this mission would be remembered as his first, but not his last. Somewhere in the world, other situations were developing that would require the same combination of technical skill, mental fortitude, and moral clarity that had been demanded of him today. And, when those moments came, he would be ready. 6 months had passed since Marcus Chen's successful first mission, and his reputation within the elite sniper community had grown considerably. The precision shot that had saved 12 hostages had earned him recognition from the highest levels of military command, but, more importantly, it had established him as someone who could be trusted with the most challenging assignments. Now, as he sat in the briefing room of a classified facility in Virginia, Marcus found himself facing what intelligence analysts were calling an impossible situation. The large screen at the front of the room displayed satellite imagery of a remote compound in Central Asia, where a situation was developing that would test every skill he had acquired. "Gentlemen, what you're about to hear doesn't leave this room," began Colonel James Harrison, a veteran officer whose presence alone indicated the critical nature of the mission. 72 hours ago, a group of highly trained mercenaries seized control of a medical aid station in the mountains of Afghanistan. The facility was being used to treat civilian casualties from recent regional conflicts. Marcus studied the imagery as Harrison continued. The compound was located in extremely rugged terrain, surrounded by mountains that rose thousands of feet above the facility. The isolation that made the medical station valuable for treating refugees also made it nearly impossible to approach without detection. The hostages include 37 civilians, men, women, and children who were receiving medical treatment, plus a team of 12 international aid workers, including 2 American doctors. Harrison's expression grew more grave. The mercenaries are demanding a ransom of $50 million and safe passage to a non-extradition country. They've made it clear that any attempt at a rescue will result in the execution of all hostages. Captain Mitchell, who had become Marcus's primary team leader since their successful first mission together, activated additional imagery showing the compound from multiple angles. "The tactical situation is unlike anything we've encountered before. The compound is built into the side of a mountain, with the main medical facility carved directly into the rock face. There are only 2 access routes, both of which are heavily defended." Marcus could immediately see why conventional rescue approaches wouldn't work. The compound's position made it impossible to approach without being detected long before any assault team could get close enough to be effective. The terrorists had chosen their location well. What about the hostage location?
Marcus asked, studying the layout of the facility. That's where things get complicated, Harrison replied, highlighting a specific area of the compound. Intelligence indicates the hostages are being held in the main treatment ward, which is essentially a large cave that's been converted into a medical facility. The entrance faces east, overlooking a valley that drops away for several thousand feet.
And the range to any viable shooting position?
Marcus was already beginning to understand why this situation was being called impossible.
Mitchell consulted her notes before answering. The closest position that offers a clear line of sight to the compound entrance is a ridgeline on the opposite side of the valley. Range, 1,600 meters.
The number hung in the air like a challenge.
1,600 meters, nearly a mile.
Marcus had trained extensively at ranges up to 1,200 meters, and his successful mission 6 months ago had been at 900 meters. But 1,600 meters pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible, even for the most skilled marksman.
Environmental factors?
Marcus asked, his mind already working through the ballistic calculations. That's where it gets worse, Harrison said grimly. The altitude at both the shooting position and the target is over 8,000 feet. The air is thin, which will affect bullet trajectory. Wind patterns are unpredictable due to the mountain terrain, with potential for sudden gusts exceeding 40 miles per hour. And weather reports indicate the possibility of sudden mountain storms that could affect visibility. Marcus absorbed the information without showing the doubt that any reasonable person would feel. 1,600 meters, at high altitude, with unpredictable wind patterns, shooting at a target location where precise shot placement would be critical to avoid hitting hostages. The technical challenges alone would be formidable, even without considering the pressure of knowing that dozens of lives depended on his accuracy.
What's the target profile? Marcus asked.
That's actually the one piece of good news, Mitchell replied.
The mercenary leader has been identified as Anton Volkov, a former Russian Special Forces operator who's been involved in several international incidents.
Intelligence suggests he's been positioning himself at the compound entrance, apparently to demonstrate control of the situation to any surveillance assets.
Shot angle? You'd be shooting downward at approximately a 20-degree angle from the ridgeline to the compound entrance.
Harrison activated a topographical display that showed the elevation differences involved. The bullet drop over that distance, combined with the angle, creates ballistic challenges that our analysts weren't sure were solvable. Marcus studied the topographical data, his mind working through the complex calculations involved. Shot angle, distance, altitude, wind, target movement, each variable multiplied the difficulty exponentially. But, as he examined the problem, he began to see possibilities that others might have missed.
What kind of equipment would be available? Marcus asked.
The best we have, Harrison replied. A custom rifle system designed specifically for extreme long-range work, matched ammunition, and the most advanced optics and environmental monitoring equipment available. You'd also have a full support team including meteorologists and ballistic specialists.
Timeline for the mission? The mercenaries have given a 48-hour deadline before they begin executing hostages. Mitchell's expression was grim.
It would take at least 18 hours to get you into position, which leaves very little margin for error. Marcus was quiet for several moments, studying the satellite imagery and processing all the variables involved. The shot they were asking him to make was at the very edge of what was physically possible. Even with perfect conditions, the margin for error would be minimal.
With the environmental challenges involved, the probability of success would be low by any conventional measure. Sir, I need to ask, are there any alternative approaches being considered? Harrison nodded. We've analyzed every possible option.
A direct assault would result in heavy casualties among the hostages due to the compound's defensive advantages. Airstrikes are not feasible because of the hostage location. Special operations insertion by helicopter is impossible due to the terrain and altitude. This shot, difficult as it may be, represents our best chance of creating an opening for a rescue operation.
And if I miss?
If you miss, or if the shot doesn't create the opening we need, those 37 civilians and 12 aid workers will likely die. Harrison's words carried the weight of absolute truth.
We're not just asking you to make a difficult shot, Chen. We're asking you to attempt something that military analysts consider to be at the very limit of human capability.
Marcus felt the familiar calm settling over him, the mental state that had served him well in training and in his previous mission.
Fear and doubt were luxuries he couldn't afford.
If this shot was possible at all, it would require absolute focus and confidence. I'll need detailed meteorological data for the target area, ballistic modeling for the specific ammunition and rifle system, and at least 4 hours of preparation time once I'm in position, Marcus said finally.
You'll have everything you need, Mitchell assured him.
But, Chen, I need to know that you understand what we're asking.
This isn't just a challenging shot. This is a shot that most experts would consider impossible. If you're not completely confident that you can make it, we need to know now.
Marcus thought about his grandfather's words about responsibility, about the shot he had made to save Emma, about the hostages from his first mission who had gone home to their families because of his precision. He thought about the 37 civilians and 12 aid workers who were counting on skills they didn't even know existed.
I can make the shot, Marcus said simply. The preparation for what was being called Operation Longshot began immediately.
Marcus spent the next several hours working with ballistic experts to understand the specific challenges involved in the shot he was being asked to make. The physics were daunting. At 1,600 meters, his bullet would take nearly 3 seconds to reach its target, during which time environmental factors would have significant effects on its trajectory. The rifle system selected for the mission was unlike anything Marcus had used before. Designed specifically for extreme long-range precision, it incorporated advanced materials and engineering that pushed the boundaries of accuracy. The telescopic scope was equally sophisticated, with computer-assisted range-finding and environmental compensation features that would help account for some of the variables involved. The ammunition is match-grade, manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, explained the ballistics specialist who was briefing Marcus on his equipment. At the range you're shooting, even tiny variations in bullet weight or powder charge can affect point of impact.
Marcus nodded, understanding that every aspect of the shot would need to be perfect. There would be no room for equipment failure or human error.
The flight to the operational area took 12 hours, during which Marcus continued to study the target area and work through mental preparations for the shot. By the time their aircraft approached the forward operating base, he had memorized every detail of the compound layout, the topographical features that would affect his shot, and the weather patterns typical for the region. The forward base was a temporary facility that had been established specifically for this operation. Intelligence personnel, meteorologists, and specialized equipment had been positioned to provide Marcus with every possible advantage. As he reviewed the latest satellite imagery and weather data, it became clear that conditions were as favorable as they were likely to be. Weather window opens at 0600 tomorrow, reported the meteorological team leader. Winds are forecast to be relatively light and consistent for about a 3-hour period. After that, typical afternoon mountain weather patterns will make the shot significantly more difficult.
Marcus understood that he would have one optimal opportunity to make the shot.
If conditions deteriorated or if other factors interfered, a hostage's chances of survival would drop dramatically. The journey to the shooting position began before dawn, with Marcus and his support team making the difficult climb to the ridgeline that had been identified as the only viable location for the shot. The terrain was exactly as challenging as expected, steep, rocky, and demanding even for experienced mountain climbers. By the time they reached the shooting position, Marcus was tired from the physical exertion of the climb, but his mind remained focused on the task ahead. Through high-powered optics, the compound was visible across the valley, looking deceptively small at the extreme distance. Range confirmed at 1,594 meters, reported his spotter, Sergeant Park, who had requested to work with Marcus again after their successful previous mission.
Current wind at our position is 8 miles per hour from the northwest.
Marcus settled behind his rifle and began the careful process of adjusting his scope for the specific conditions. The morning light was clear, providing excellent visibility across the valley. Through his scope, he could see activity around the compound entrance, but individual figures were difficult to distinguish at the extreme range. Command, sniper team is in position and conducting final preparations, Marcus reported through his radio.
Roger, sniper.
Latest intelligence indicates target is maintaining position near compound entrance.
Assault teams are standing by for your signal.
The next several hours passed slowly as Marcus monitored the target area and waited for the optimal shot opportunity. The psychological pressure was intense, not just because of the extreme technical difficulty of the shot, but because of the knowledge that dozens of innocent lives depended on his ability to perform at the absolute peak of human capability.
Movement at target location, Park reported.
Individual in dark clothing is positioned near the entrance. Marcus could see the figure through his scope, a man standing near what appeared to be the main entrance to the medical facility. At 1,600 meters, precise identification was difficult, but the figure's position and behavior matched intelligence reports about Volkov. Wind check, Marcus requested.
Current wind is northeast at 12 miles per hour, steady.
Temperature is 38 degrees, barometric pressure is falling slightly. Marcus made adjustments to his scope, calculating the complex trajectory his bullet would follow over the extreme distance. The mathematics involved were staggering, accounting for bullet drop, wind drift, the effects of altitude on air density, and the downward shooting angle. Even with the most sophisticated equipment available, the shot would require a combination of technical precision and intuitive marksmanship that few people in the world possessed. Target appears stationary, Marcus reported.
I'm beginning final shot preparation. All teams, this is command. Sniper is preparing for shot. All elements stand by.
Marcus's breathing slowed as he entered the mental state that had become familiar during his most challenging shots. The world seemed to narrow until nothing existed except the target, his rifle, and the environmental factors that would affect his bullet's trajectory. His heartbeat steadied, and his grip on the rifle relaxed into the perfect balance between control and sensitivity. Through his scope, the crosshairs were centered on the distant figure. At this range, the target appeared impossibly small, a tiny silhouette against the mountainside that represented both the ultimate test of his skills and the only hope for the hostages whose lives hung in the balance. "Send it," came the quiet command through his earpiece. Marcus's finger applied steady pressure to the trigger, and the rifle fired. The powerful cartridge sent its bullet streaking across the valley at over 3 times the speed of sound, but even at that velocity, the extreme distance meant nearly 3 seconds would pass before Marcus would know whether his shot had found its mark. Through his scope, Marcus watched the distant target area, waiting for confirmation that his bullet had arrived. The seconds stretched like hours, and then, suddenly, he saw the figure near the compound entrance drop from sight. "Target down," Marcus reported, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he had just accomplished. Almost immediately, the sounds of helicopter rotors filled the air as the assault teams, which had been positioned as close to the compound as possible, began their approach. The precision of Marcus's shot had eliminated the mercenary leader and created the confusion necessary for the rescue operation to proceed. The next 30 minutes were tense as radio communications filled with updates from the assault teams as they secured the compound and evacuated the hostages. The extreme range that had made Marcus's shot so difficult also meant that he was too far away to provide additional fire support, leaving the success of the rescue entirely in the hands of the ground teams. "All teams, this is Assault Leader.
Compound is secure. All hostages are accounted for and being evacuated.
Medical personnel are treating minor injuries, but no serious casualties." Marcus felt the tension leave his body as the confirmation came through his earpiece. The shot that military analysts had considered impossible had achieved its intended purpose. 37 civilians and 12 aid workers would return safely to their families because of his ability to place a single bullet precisely where it needed to be at an extreme distance under challenging conditions. "Outstanding work, Sniper," came Colonel Harrison's voice through the radio. "That shot will be studied and remembered for years to come.
You've just redefined what's considered possible in long-range precision shooting."
As Marcus began packing his equipment for the journey back to base, he reflected on what had just occurred. The 1,600-meter shot represented not just a technical achievement, but a demonstration that human skill and determination could overcome seemingly impossible challenges when innocent lives were at stake. The shot had taken months of preparation, hours of patient waiting, and less than 3 seconds to execute.
But, in those 3 seconds, Marcus had proven that the limits of what was possible could be pushed beyond what most people believed achievable when the cause was just and the preparation was thorough. As the helicopter carrying Marcus and his team lifted off from the forward base, he could see the compound in the distance where dozens of people were beginning their journey back to safety. His shot had been just one element in a complex operation involving hundreds of personnel, but it had been the critical element that made everything else possible. The world was full of situations where traditional approaches weren't sufficient, where the precision of a single well-placed shot could mean the difference between success and failure. Marcus understood that his ability to make shots like the one he had just accomplished would likely be called upon again, in situations that hadn't yet been imagined by military planners. But, for now, he was content in the knowledge that his skills had been used to protect innocent lives and that the months of training and preparation had proved worthwhile when tested under the most extreme conditions possible. The impossible shot had become possible through dedication, skill, and an unwavering commitment to the protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. The emergency briefing came at 3 a.m, pulling Marcus Chun from the deep sleep he rarely got between missions. After his successful 1,600-meter shot 3 months earlier, he had become the go-to sniper for situations that other specialists considered hopeless. Now, as he sat in the secure briefing room, looking at satellite footage of what appeared to be a floating oil platform, Marcus knew he was about to face his greatest challenge yet. This is the Oceanic Pioneer, a deep-sea drilling platform located 200 miles off the coast of Norway, began Admiral Rebecca Torres, whose presence indicated the international significance of the developing crisis. 18 hours ago, it was seized by a group of environmental extremists who were threatening to trigger an ecological disaster that could affect the entire North Sea. Marcus studied the imagery of the platform, noting its isolation in the middle of the ocean and the complex structure that rose several stories above the water. Unlike his previous missions, which had involved stationary targets in predictable environments, this situation presented variables he had never encountered. The extremists have taken 38 hostages, including essential personnel needed to safely shut down drilling operations, Torres continued. They're demanding immediate cessation of all deep-sea drilling activities in the North Sea and the release of several imprisoned associates. If their demands aren't met within 48 hours, they've threatened to detonate explosives that would cause catastrophic environmental damage. Captain Mitchell activated additional displays showing the platform from multiple angles. The tactical situation is complicated by several factors. First, the platform is constantly moving due to ocean swells, making it a moving target. Second, weather conditions in the North Sea are deteriorating, with winds expected to reach 60 miles per hour and wave heights of 20 feet or more. Marcus could immediately see why conventional assault methods wouldn't work. The platform's isolation made it impossible to approach without detection, and the weather conditions would make helicopter operations extremely dangerous. What about the hostage location? Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would be as challenging as everything else about this mission. The hostages are being held in the platform's main control room, which is located on the uppermost level of the structure, Torres replied, highlighting the relevant area on the display. The room has large windows facing all directions, providing visibility for the terrorists but also creating potential shooting opportunities. And the shooting position? Marcus was beginning to understand why this briefing was happening at 3 a.m. Mitchell consulted her notes with an expression that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the plan. A Norwegian Navy frigate will position itself approximately 800 meters from the platform. You'll be shooting from the ship's deck, which means you'll be dealing with the movement of both your shooting platform and the target. The implications hit Marcus immediately. Not only would he be shooting at a target that was moving due to ocean swells, but he would be shooting from a platform that was also moving. The relative motion between the two would create ballistic challenges that were unlike anything he had trained for. Environmental factors? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect that everything about this mission would be at the edge of what was possible. North Sea weather is notoriously unpredictable, Torres replied grimly. Current conditions show winds gusting up to 45 miles per hour, with the potential for sudden increases. Wave heights are 15 feet and building. The shooting will likely need to take place during a winter storm. Marcus absorbed the information, understanding that this mission would test not just his marksmanship skills,
but his ability to adapt to conditions that were constantly changing. The technical challenges alone would be formidable, but the addition of weather and sea conditions pushed the difficulty into uncharted territory.
What's the target profile? Marcus asked. The extremist leader has been identified as Dr. Elena Petrov, a former marine biologist turned radical environmental activist, Mitchell replied.
Intelligence indicates she's been positioning herself in the control room, apparently to monitor both the hostages and any approaching vessels.
Shot angle and distance variables?
The distance will vary between 750 and 850 meters, depending on the relative positions of the frigate and the platform, Torres explained. The angle will be constantly changing due to the movement of both vessels. Our analysts estimate you'll have shooting opportunities lasting no more than a few seconds when the conditions align properly. Marcus studied the technical data, understanding that this shot would require not just precision, but perfect timing. He would need to account for the movement of both his shooting platform and his target, while dealing with wind conditions that could change dramatically from second to second.
What kind of support equipment would be available? Marcus asked.
The Norwegian frigate has been equipped with specialized stabilization equipment designed to minimize the effects of wave motion, Torres replied. You'll also have access to advanced weather monitoring systems and a team of naval specialists who understand sea conditions better than anyone.
Timeline? The extremists' deadline is 36 hours from now, Mitchell said.
It will take 12 hours to reach the frigate and another 6 hours to get into position.
That leaves very little margin for weather delays or other complications.
Marcus was quiet for several moments, processing the unprecedented challenges involved in this mission. Shooting from a moving platform at a moving target, in severe weather conditions, with the lives of 38 hostages and potentially massive environmental consequences hanging in the balance.
The probability of success by conventional measures would be extremely low.
Sir, I need to understand, what happens if the shot fails or if weather conditions make it impossible?
Torres's expression was grave. If we can't neutralize the threat, the extremists will likely carry out their threat to detonate the platform. The environmental damage would be catastrophic, and the hostages would almost certainly be killed in the explosion.
Alternative approaches?
We've considered every option, Mitchell replied.
A direct assault by special forces would be detected long before they could reach the platform. The extremists have made it clear that any approaching helicopters or boats will result in immediate detonation of their explosives. This shot represents our only viable option. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had faced difficult shots before, but this mission involved variables that were completely outside his experience. The success of the operation would depend on his ability to adapt his skills to conditions that were constantly changing. "I'll take the mission," Marcus said finally. "But I'll need to work closely with naval specialists who understand sea conditions, and I'll need access to the most advanced stabilization equipment available."
"You'll have everything we can provide," Torres assured him.
"But, Chen, I need you to understand that this mission pushes the boundaries of what anyone has ever attempted. The combination of factors involved makes the shot theoretically possible but practically almost impossible."
The preparation for what was designated Operation Deep Shot began immediately.
Marcus spent the next several hours working with naval experts to understand the challenges of shooting from a ship at sea. The physics were complex. Not only did he need to account for the movement of both platforms, but he also had to consider the effects of salt air on bullet trajectory and the challenges of maintaining equipment in harsh marine conditions. The flight to Norway took 8 hours, during which Marcus studied weather patterns, platform schematics, and the specific challenges of maritime shooting. By the time their aircraft approached the naval base, he had begun to develop strategies for dealing with the unprecedented variables he would face. The Norwegian frigate HMS Thor was a modern vessel equipped with advanced stabilization systems that had been modified specifically for this mission. The ship's captain, Commander Eric Hansen, briefed Marcus on the vessel's capabilities and the expected sea conditions. "The North Sea is not forgiving," Hansen said as they reviewed weather forecasts. "Wave heights are currently 18 feet and building. Wind speeds are gusting up to 50 miles per hour.
These are conditions that would normally prevent any kind of precision operations.
Marcus understood that the weather would be as much of an adversary as the extremists themselves.
The technical challenges of the shot would be compounded by environmental factors that were completely beyond his control.
The voyage to the operational area took 6 hours, during which Marcus experienced firsthand the challenges he would face.
The frigate, despite its advanced stabilization systems, moved constantly in response to the heavy seas.
Standing steadily on deck would be difficult, making a precision shot would seem nearly impossible. Platform in sight, came the report from the ship's bridge as they approached the drilling platform. Through binoculars, Marcus could see the massive structure rising from the gray North Sea, waves crashing against its support pillars and spray reaching high into the air.
Range to target?
Marcus asked as he studied the platform through his rifle scope. Current range is 790 meters, reported his spotter, Chief Petty Officer Lars Nordahl, a Norwegian naval specialist who had volunteered for the mission. But, the distance is varying by plus or minus 50 meters as both vessels move with the swells.
Marcus could see the challenge immediately.
Through his scope, the platform appeared to move constantly, rising and falling with the waves, while his own position did the same in a different rhythm. Finding a moment when both platforms were stable enough for a precision shot would require patience and perfect timing. Weather update shows wind gusts increasing to 60 miles per hour, Nordahl reported. Visibility is decreasing as the storm intensifies. Marcus settled into a shooting position that had been specially prepared on the frigate's deck, with stabilization equipment designed to minimize the effects of the ship's movement. Even with the advanced technology, he could feel the constant motion that would make this shot unlike anything he had ever attempted. "Command, sniper team is in position," Marcus reported through his radio. "Conditions are extremely challenging, but we're preparing to engage when opportunity presents."
Roger, sniper. Latest intelligence indicates target is in the control room as expected.
Be advised, weather conditions are expected to worsen over the next several hours. Through his scope, Marcus could see activity in the platform's control room. The large windows provided visibility, but, at the extreme range and, in the deteriorating weather conditions, distinguishing specific individuals was difficult.
Movement in target area, Nordahl reported.
Individual near the control room windows, but identification is difficult due to distance and weather. Marcus watched through his scope as figures moved within the control room. The constant motion of both the platform and his own shooting position made it extremely difficult to maintain a steady sight picture.
Every few seconds, the crosshairs of his scope would sweep across the target area as the vessels moved with the waves. "This is impossible," Nordahl said quietly, voicing what they were both thinking.
"The movement is too unpredictable. There's no way to time a shot with both platforms moving independently."
Marcus didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on studying the patterns of movement.
Both the frigate and the platform were responding to the same wave patterns, but with different timing due to their different sizes and designs. If he could learn to predict the relative motion, there might be brief moments when a shot would be possible. "Wind check," Marcus requested. "Current wind is northwest at 58 miles per hour, gusting to 70. Temperature is 31 degrees, humidity is 90%. The wind conditions alone would make the shot extremely difficult, even without the added complications of shooting from a moving platform." Marcus made adjustments to his scope, but he knew that the constantly changing conditions would require him to make calculations and corrections in real time. "Wait," Marcus said suddenly, watching the movement patterns through his scope.
"I think I see a pattern." Both platforms seem to reach a relative stable point approximately every 45 seconds.
Nordahl studied the motion through his own optics.
"You might be right. There does seem to be a brief moment when the relative movement is minimized."
Marcus began timing the intervals, watching for the moments when both vessels briefly moved in synchronization.
The windows of opportunity were extremely brief, perhaps 2 or 3 seconds when a shot might be possible. "Target identified," Nordahl reported. "Female figure in dark clothing, positioned near the control room windows."
Marcus could see her through his scope, Dr. Petrov, standing near the large windows of the control room, apparently monitoring the approaching frigate. The distance was approximately 800 meters, varying constantly with the movement of both vessels.
Command, Sniper has target identification. Preparing for shot when conditions allow. Roger, Sniper. Be advised, extremist deadline is now 12 hours. Weather conditions are expected to continue deteriorating. Marcus understood that time was running out. The longer they waited, the worse conditions would become, and the lower their chances of success. But rushing the shot would be even more dangerous. A miss could trigger the very disaster they were trying to prevent. Next opportunity window in 30 seconds, Marcus reported, having learned to predict the timing of the brief stable periods. He settled into his shooting position, accounting for wind conditions and the complex ballistics involved in shooting from one moving platform to another. The mathematics were staggering. He needed to predict where both platforms would be when his bullet arrived, while accounting for wind that was changing direction and velocity constantly. 15 seconds to window, Marcus announced. Through his scope, he could see Petrov clearly now, standing near the control room windows. The crosshairs moved constantly as both platforms responded to the heavy seas, but Marcus had learned to anticipate the motion. 10 seconds. Marcus's breathing slowed as he entered the focused mental state that had served him in his most challenging shots. The world narrowed until nothing existed except the target, the environmental factors affecting his shot, and the split-second timing required to fire during the brief moment of relative stability. 5 seconds. The platforms reached the predicted position, and, for a brief moment, the relative movement minimized. Marcus's finger found the trigger, and his shot rang out across the stormy North Sea. The bullet streaked toward the platform, but, before Marcus could confirm the hit, a massive wave struck the frigate, throwing him off balance and obscuring his view through the scope. Target status unknown, Marcus reported. Wave interference prevented shot confirmation. The next few minutes were tense as they waited for reports from intelligence assets monitoring the platform. The storm was intensifying, making communication difficult and visibility poor. Command to Sniper, initial reports suggest target was hit, but situation remains unclear. Be prepared for follow-up shot if necessary. Marcus maintained his position, despite the increasingly difficult conditions. Water from breaking waves was reaching the frigate's deck, and the wind was making it difficult to maintain equipment stability. Movement on platform, Nordahl reported suddenly. It looks like there's activity in the control room, but I can't determine if the target is down. Through his scope, Marcus could see figures moving within the control room, but the weather conditions and distance made positive identification impossible. If his shot had missed, or if Petrov had only been wounded, the extremists might carry out their threat. Platform is signaling, came a report from the frigate's bridge. They're requesting medical assistance and indicating surrender. Marcus felt a wave of relief, but he maintained his position until the situation could be confirmed. The shot he had made under impossible conditions appeared to have achieved its purpose, but, in conditions this extreme, nothing could be taken for granted. All teams, this is command. Platform personnel are indicating that the extremist leader is down and they wish to surrender. Medical and security teams are being dispatched. As the rescue operation began, Marcus reflected on what had just occurred. The shot from a moving platform at a moving target, in storm conditions that would normally prevent any kind of precision operations, represented the most challenging marksmanship feat he had ever attempted. The combination of technical skill, environmental adaptation, and split-second timing required for the shot had pushed his abilities to their absolute limits. But, once again, the precision of a single well-placed bullet had created the opening necessary to save innocent lives and prevent a potential ecological disaster. As the frigate began the journey back to port, Marcus understood that he had just crossed another threshold in his development as a precision shooter. The skills demonstrated in this mission, the ability to adapt to constantly changing conditions and make precision shots under circumstances that others would consider impossible, would likely be called upon again in situations that hadn't yet been imagined. But, for now, he was satisfied in the knowledge that 38 hostages would return safely to their families, and that a potential environmental catastrophe had been prevented by his ability to make one perfect shot when everything seemed to be going wrong.